This is the Walnut Tealight Candle Holder, and in this video I'm going to go over how you too can make this super beginner friendly project. Let's get into it. Like all good stories, we start off with some wood. We want a piece that's big enough to fit some candles on. You can make a holder for 1 candle, for 7 candles, for 420 candles, do whatever you want with what you have. In this case, I'm going to make a couple with different sizes and different amounts of candles so I can get a feel for what I like the best. I spent some time putting different numbers of candles in different places, but in the end I decided to keep it simple and stuck with 3 candles on a single block. With 3 candles in mind, that kind of locks in the size of the block. It needs to be big enough to fit 3 candles comfortably without looking too spread out and not too packed. I found 3 by 1.5 by 9 inches or 7.5 by 3.5 by 23.5 centimeters worked really well for me. Here I'm cutting the boards down to length on the chop saw, but this could easily be done by hand instead. Perks of a small shop. One day I'll make a cart for this saw. If you have rough lumber like me, you'll need to plane the piece nice and flat. You don't want the candle holder to spin, so you can't have any high spots on the base. So that's the only side that really needs any real attention. I personally wanted a nice, clean, square, flat look to mine, so I planed all 4 sides nice and flat and as parallel as I could get them. You can use a hand plane for this, or if you have them, an electric planer would be good to get the worst of the flattening done, or you could pass it through a planer or a jointer if you have one. Next up, I'm cutting this wide piece into 2 narrower pieces. Each will go on to become its own candle holder. I'm setting the fence on my table saw to be 3 inches wide and running the piece through. With the worst of the preparation done, we can drill the slots for the candles. The candle size turned out to be about 38mm, and my closest forstner bit was 41mm, so I used that one to drill the holes. I had a practice run on a piece of pine I had lying around just to see how the holes would end up, how deep I had to go, and just to have a practice with the forstner bits. I ended up making 3 depths, one where the candle stuck out a bit, one that was flush, and one that was sunk into the wood. I like the flush one best, so we're going to use that one for all 3 holes. I then decided to see if rounding the edges would look and feel better, and I don't think it did. I prefer the nice sharp edges that came from just using the forstner bit. Time to mark out where the holes go. To figure out where to drill the holes, I divided the length of the piece by 4 so that I could get 3 lines equally apart on the top, and then drew another line through the middle on the piece to mark the exact 3 points where the forstner bit needs to drill in. I punched a guiding hole into the piece to make sure that the point of the forstner bit had something to guide it. And here I made the mistake of thinking 3 candles means dividing by 3, which only gives you 2 lines to go by. Glad I was marking it out so I could see the mistake. And here's the markings ready to go. I eyeballed the forstner bit along the 3 markings to see if the holes would be too close together before finally punching a small guiding hole into the crosses to give the forstner bit a head start. Here I'm using a hand drill to carve out the holes. This could be done with a drill press if you have one at hand, but can be done with a hand drill with a touch more effort. I did have to change the batteries a few times to do this, so bear that in mind. Luckily I have 2 batteries, so I can use one while the other charges. You'll want to be careful not to overheat your forstner bits, especially the bigger bits on harder woods. If you keep them hot for too long, they'll lose their edge. I find drilling in hard for a few seconds and pulling out to let it cool off is the way to go. Be careful though, because pulling the forstner bit out while it's still spinning can easily carve away at the neat edges and make a bit of a mess. Just keep going until you get near the right depth. I found that I wanted the candles to sit very slightly under flush, so I just kept taking off a little at a time until I could pass my finger over the top without hitting the metal bits of the candle. And here's an example of that scuff mark if you're not careful pulling the bit out while it's still spinning. And this is already starting to take shape. Next, we have some sanding to do. This is the easy part on a piece like this. You go round the outside, round the outside, round the outside with some 80 grit and then 120 grit to get the surface smoothed out. You don't really need to sand the holes. I mean, the candles are going to be in there full time, so it doesn't really matter. Even after only a pass with 80 grit, it's amazing the difference that some sanding can make. And now the same thing again, but with 120 grit. And now we move on to the finish. The finish is completely up to you. I debated leaving the walnut unfinished, and I even shot the end footage without finish just in case I hated the finished version. I used mineral oil for walnut in the past and I found it didn't bring enough depth to the wood, so I made a mix of beeswax and mineral oil, so 1 part wax, 3 parts oil, and spread a single coat on top of the whole piece, and it came out looking great. Here I'm waxing some scraps to see what it would look like, and then compared them to the non-finished walnut just to see which I preferred. And I think it looks great. I'll go ahead and add this finish to the whole block and see how we go. In terms of waxing technique, I'm just adding a coat of it on with a clean cloth before removing the excess with another clean cloth and leaving it to dry or cure. And that about does it for the instructional part of the video. You can do this project with any other wood type that you fancy, and you could even try out different finishes. I spent some time experimenting with wire brushes to see if I can get some nice grain pop on my pine attempt. It came out okay, but doing the same on the walnut and maple made it look a bit rubbish. I hope you got something out of this video. Go and give it a try. It's a simple project to do for beginners. I found the skill floor to be quite low and the skill ceiling to be quite high, and it's completely up to you how hard you want to make this. You can mix and mash the woods, add some chamfers or slopes along the length, make unique patterns instead of a 3 in a row that I went with. If you gave this a go, then let me know how it went and share some images of your work. And here's a maple one that I also made, but I think I prefer the walnut one. I quite like that rough edge the maple has, and it adds a lot of character to the piece. Maybe it would work better with darker candles. Which one do you prefer? Let me know down below. If you liked the video, please consider liking and subscribing. It helps the channel out a lot. If you have any suggestions, throw them down in the comments so I and others like me can learn. Take it easy, and I'll see you next time.